Thanks very much for the opportunity to present Cyber Ireland here today. And thanks to John for doing most of the hard work in setting out the scene for cluster development and cluster policy in organisations in Ireland. So I'm going to talk about Cyber Ireland, which is the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation for Ireland. It's a relatively new organisation. We launched it in May of 2019, but we've had quite an amount of success. And I suppose this is maybe an example of what we're trying to achieve is a best practice cluster development model for Ireland, where we're taking all of the learnings from how European cluster organisations are developed and managed and cluster theory to support the development of this cybersecurity cluster organisation for Ireland. Because as John outlined, there's kind of been a different policy context for Ireland with regards to the development and support at a national level for cluster organisations. And I'm also going to talk then about a specific regional initiative as part of Cyber Ireland, because although we're the National Cybersecurity Cluster Organisation, we cover the whole of the country. We're specifically looking at how to drive kind of regional buy-in and a regional value for specific areas of Ireland through the cluster as well. So I'll be talking about specific initiative there around these regional chapters that we've developed. So as I said, Cyber Ireland was launched in May of last year, and our overall goal is to represent the cybersecurity industry in Ireland. We have a national scope, and the reason for that is because our aim is to put Ireland on the map as being a leading location internationally for cybersecurity. And we can't do that if we just look at it from a regional perspective for Ireland, because it's just too small. Now, I'm based down in Cork, in the very south of the country, where there is a hub of cybersecurity capacity, multinational companies and SMEs. So this is very much the centre of the cluster for cybersecurity. But if we were only to look at the Cork region for developing this cluster, we would miss out on our international opportunity and vision of putting Ireland on the map, because as you can see from the dots around this map here, our members, 180 of them that have signed up to be part of the cluster in the first 15 to 16 months, they're actually spread across the whole of the country. So you have hubs in Cork in the south, very much so in Dublin, the east of the country, but they're also sprinkled around the west of the country and even up as far as the northwest into Sligo and Donegal as well. And our key objectives are around enhancing the innovation, growth and competitiveness of the companies and organisations that are part of the cluster. So traditionally, organisations in Ireland that might call themselves cluster organisations would generally be focused on being industry associations or networking bodies, representing their members at a regional and a national level, providing networking services. But I suppose what we're trying to do is to take that to the next level with regards to developing an innovation cluster, supporting the companies through that. So I suppose where this all started out from and where the need for this cluster organisation came about was that there was a global market opportunity identified. If you look at the cybersecurity market globally, we've all experienced, I think, at this stage, probably some sort of data breach of an emailing list maybe that we've signed up to, that company's data has been breached and possibly sold on to cyber criminals. And if we look at the impact of COVID-19 over the past 7 months, there has been a huge increase in the amount of cyber attacks and cyber threats, everything from increased phishing scams to ransomware attacks. And cyber criminals are very much taking advantage of the COVID-19 pandemic. We actually even see it in critical national infrastructure in areas like telecoms and utilities. There are examples of cyber criminals targeting hospitals in Czechia and Czech Republic and the US with ransomware attacks. So they're taking advantage of this global pandemic. Which means there's actually an increase in the need for cybersecurity. And every year there is trillions of dollars in damage done due to cybercrime. And because of this, and because I suppose our economies are moving to more digitally intensive economies, there's a greater need for cybersecurity, and that global market then for cybersecurity is increasing year on year. And so if we were to look at the Irish market, it's actually quite small. It's only 500 million per annum. So really our goal is to support any companies or organizations in Ireland that have a global vision and that are looking to address the global cybersecurity market. But cybersecurity is important for all sectors of the economy. It's not just looking at it as a pure sectoral focus. And if we look at Ireland's digitally intensive sectors, we've estimated there's over 200,000 people actually employed in those sectors. They contribute a quarter of our exports per annum. If you look at the number of data centres that are in Ireland, there's over 50 of them now, and there's been billions invested in those data centres over the past 10 years. If you think of Facebook, Amazon, Google, all have their data centres around the M50 in Dublin. And security is integral to our digitally intensive sectors, to those data centres, but also as Ireland is recognised as being a digital front runner in Europe. And for our SMEs to be able to trade online and do business internationally, we need to ensure that we have a safe and secure economy and society to do business. And on top of that, you have multinational companies that are located in Ireland that actually host their intellectual property and intangible assets here as well. So that we need to be able to be seen to be a safe and secure place to do business as well. So cybersecurity is really critical for all sectors of the economy, for critical national infrastructure, for government, for businesses, and for citizens as well. And some of the ingredients of the cybersecurity cluster that were there a long time before actually Cyber Ireland was developed is we have a really strong multinational base in cybersecurity. We have 5 of the top 10 software security companies located in Ireland. We've mapped over 40 companies that are pure cybersecurity companies, or actually they could be multinationals that have security operations in Ireland. And if we look at where these companies are actually located, I've just highlighted here, all the ones in red are actually located in Cork. So that really shows that Cork is the centre of the cybersecurity cluster in Ireland. But these multinational companies are also backed up by a growing and strong Indigenous sector. So we've over 60 Indigenous cybersecurity companies that have export focus across a number of 5 different key areas that we've mapped out. And there's a real potential here to support the Indigenous SME cybersecurity sector through leveraging the multinational sector that we have in Ireland as well. So they're 2 of the key ingredients. The other one is around talent. There's actually a worldwide shortage of cybersecurity professionals. It's estimated that there's going to be millions of unfilled cybersecurity roles in the coming years internationally because we just can't fill those jobs. So that means that companies are actually going to wherever they can find the talent, and it's the number one reason why companies locate in Ireland for cybersecurity is access to that talent. So we estimate that there's over 7,000 people actually employed in the cybersecurity sector in Ireland, around 30,000 professionals with cybersecurity qualifications or certifications. And we have a really strong education system as well. There's over 120 courses that can get somebody into a career in cybersecurity across the country that we've mapped in the higher education institutes and the education and training boards, as well as online courses as well. There's an initiative from the government called the Cybersecurity Skills Initiative, which is training up 5,000 cybersecurity professionals to impact all companies across all different sectors. There's a FIT cybersecurity apprenticeship program that's been launched. And even this year, there was 18 new cybersecurity courses funded by government across the different HEIs. Another key ingredient to the cybersecurity sector is our R&D capacity. Security research is done across a number of academic institutes and national research centres across the country. And there's also quite a bit of research happening in multinational companies as well. However, at the moment, this research is fragmented across a number of different universities and research centres. So we don't have one single national cybersecurity research centre to coordinate all of the research that's happening in the cybersecurity space at the moment. And that's one of the key challenges for the sector if Ireland wants to move up the value chain in the types of jobs that we have here. and to really become a global leader for cybersecurity innovation and solutions, we need to have a national cybersecurity research centre to support that as well. So they're the key ingredients of the cluster that was there before Cyber Ireland. And we, I suppose, initially started looking at this back in 2017, where there was an industry forum held between IDA and Cork Institute of Technology to address some key challenges for the sector. The number one challenge being the critical skills shortage for cybersecurity companies. And then the follow-on from that, as John mentioned, then there was an application to IDA for seed investment to set up and manage a cluster organization to address these key challenges identified by industry. And so that project started in November of 2018, 2 years ago. And the first 6 months was going out and engaging with all of the key stakeholders across the country in the cybersecurity sector, from industry, academia, and government. We actually ran these 3 workshops in Cork, Galway, and Dublin to understand what are the needs of the cybersecurity industry, what are the key strengths, and what are some of the challenges that companies and academics have. And then what would be the role of a cluster organization in addressing these challenges and which ones we should focus on, because we only have a certain amount of resources and we can't boil the ocean. So we need to be quite clear on what areas we're going to focus on as well. So we had a huge amount of engagement through those 3 workshops. Over 90 companies and organizations attended those, and 250 people across the country. And those workshops, they actually got the buy-in from all of the industry stakeholders, academic stakeholders across the country before we launched the cluster organization in May of 2019, where we had an official launch. We had a strategy and a cluster board as well. So since May of last year, we've been developing out the various different cluster objectives and our initiatives. We also received funding under that program that John alluded to there through Enterprise Ireland, the Regional Technology Cluster Fund. So that will allow us to develop out our activities to specifically support startup and SME cybersecurity companies across Ireland as well. So our objectives are across 4 key areas: building the community, so supporting promotion and networking of our members. That's really the foundation of all of the cluster initiatives that we have. If you don't have the community there that knows each other, that trusts each other, you can't do all of the other activities as well. So the second one is around supporting talent and skills. And the third one is enhancing collaborative research and development between industry and academia. And the fourth one being around business development, supporting startups, startup ecosystems, supporting Indigenous SMEs, but also attracting FDI as well. So what I'm going to talk about next is the regional chapters and why we actually set these up. And I'll go back to the initiation workshops that we ran in February of 2019 in Cork, Galway, and Dublin. And what we found in these workshops was that each of the regions actually had their own diversity and identity. So each of the regions had their own strengths. Some of them had specific sectoral strengths that they were interested in, whether it be the security of financial services or security of manufacturing or IT companies. Others were more focused on pure cybersecurity companies like we have in the south. Others would have had more multinational companies. Others in the west of the country had more startups and SMEs. And then some of them had different challenges as well. Some of them were looking to develop internship programs where college students could go in and work in industry or develop new courses in specific areas. Others were more interested in national advocacy and promotion. So we kind of understood that there was diversity across the different regions and that we needed regional buy-in to be able to drive the cluster and feed into our national activities. So you can actually see from the surveys that we ran at these workshops, the numbers here show the priorities of the workshop when we were in Cork compared to the overall priorities for Ireland. And there's kind of differences there between what the attendees at those workshops actually voted for should be the cluster initiatives going into our cluster strategy. The other thing I suppose we need to be aware of as well is when you're talking about a cluster organization or a cluster, it has its benefits from the geographic proximity of the members of the cluster being close to one another so that they can meet, they can attend networking events so that they can do business together. And it's kind of suggested in the cluster theory that this should be around a 2-hour radius from the center of the cluster organization. So if we look at Cork being the center of the cluster, and if you go out 2 hours from that, you would only be able to capture a certain, I suppose, number of the cybersecurity companies in Ireland. So what we did was, while we wanted the cluster to be at a national level, we decided that we needed to drive this through the different regions, and where we would start would be with the South chapter, as that had, I suppose, the biggest concentration of companies in Ireland. So we set up these regional chapters with the aim of gaining buy-in from the regional stakeholders across industry, academia and government. The aim there was to identify and build on the regional strengths of each of these regions, to address the specific challenges that each of them may have, and then to provide a regular meetup for the cybersecurity community. So building the community, having regular networking events, but all of this would then feed into the national Cyber Ireland activities, and that we would have a critical mass then at a national level to represent the sector for industry, academia and government. It was important that these regional chapters as well, that they weren't being dictated by Cyber Ireland, that they were actually driven by local regional stakeholders from industry. So that was a kind of a key requirement that we set out, that we needed to identify the leaders in the region that would drive this and would be able to identify what were the key strengths and challenges for the region as well. So the first one we set up was the South chapter in Cork. We launched that in February of this year, and we had a really good attendance. There was over 80 people attending that workshop in Cork. We had the director of the National Cybersecurity Centre down to attend that, and we set out what was the vision for these regional chapters. We invited people to get involved. We surveyed the members to understand what their interest areas are, the strengths, the weaknesses. And after that as well, we had a small meeting with senior leaders from about 8 key companies, 2 universities and the National Cybersecurity Centre as well, to define the specific interests, the strengths and the weaknesses for that region. We also identified who are going to be the chapter leads. So we kind of identified key people from industry and set them the task of organising the regular events for the cybersecurity community, identifying those regional strengths and challenges, and that they would work with the cluster manager and the cluster board to disseminate Cyber Ireland's national activities, but also focus on what specific regional initiatives could be identified and how we could support those from a national level as well. So I suppose if we were to look at some of the successes to date of the South chapter, which was just set up in February of this year, I suppose the key one was identifying those key strengths, which they've looked at around threat intelligence and IoT security. They've also organised a number of regular meetings. Now, these would have been held in person, but they've all been moved online due to COVID. So we had one in May around from now to reopening, facing the security challenges. We had another one then in June around cybersecurity and the workforce of the future, the human element. And more recently then we had one in September around threat intelligence and sharing. And we had such a good response to this actual workshop and interest in the topic that the South chapter decided this should be kind of one of their key focus areas. And they're actually setting up a working group as part of Cyber Ireland now to look at this area of threat intelligence and sharing, where they're going to be running a number of workshops over the coming months to take somebody from an introductory level in threat intel right up to advanced. And it's moving actually from something that was just part of the South chapter to it's going to become a national initiative as part of Cyber Ireland now. There's also been some other successes around addressing the skills challenges for the region. So we've been working quite closely with the higher education institutes, the universities, the regional skills forum managers, the SkillNet program with IT at Cork to address specific skills challenges for the region. We've also launched the first cybersecurity skills industry survey this year to get a better understanding of the skills gaps and shortages in the cybersecurity sector, more information around the types of roles and certifications in those roles, the required skills and training needs of industry as well. So we had a really good response from that, but the reason was we were able to go out through the regional chapters to push that out and to get a very good response rate as well. So in summary, I suppose we've set up these regional chapters. The South one has been such a success that afterwards we then set up one for the west of the country, and that's based in Galway, and it's a partnership with another industry association or cluster organisation called ITAG, which represents the ICT sector in the west of the country. So they run the regional activities. They have a specific Cyber Ireland chapter there, which feeds into the overall national activities then. And then recently we've been developing another one in the northwest of the country, up in Donegal and Sligo, which is going to launch in the first week of November. And then finally, we're going to be moving on to the east of the country in Dublin and setting up another chapter there. And the reason we didn't actually start with Dublin is because there's a number of cybersecurity meetups and organisations already running in Dublin. So we don't want to compete with any of the organisations that are there already. And so in closing, I suppose these kind of regional chapters, I think, is a nice example of a regional initiative led by the local stakeholders from industry, academia and government to address the key challenges for their region, but that it feeds up into the national level Cyber Ireland activities then as well, and how we were able to give a voice for the regional Cyber Ireland members that benefits, I suppose, the overall cluster organisation at a national level as well. So that's everything from me, Karen.